Welcome in for a second successive week. Arsenal give up a 2-0 lead, pegged back to 2-2 at the London Stadium by West Ham. It's now just a 4-point advantage in the Premier League table, and Manchester City have a game in hand. Stevie Nicol, alongside myself, Kay Murray, Dalen Cuff, Arsenal superfan as well. We'll hear from him in just a moment. Want to start with you though, Stevie, because you weren't swayed last week with what happened at Anfield. You felt then that Arsenal was still going to go on to win the title. How are you feeling after today's showing?
Well, I think you got to say it's advantage Manchester City. You know, the fact that the reason that I had Arsenal up until this weekend was because I honestly felt it was in their hands. You know, basically they had to go to City and City had to win. And I felt that with what Arsenal have going forward, City pushing forward all the time is going to leave some gaps for the pace and the quality that Arsenal have. And obviously, Arsenal had the points. So I thought it was advantage Arsenal. After today, however, I mean, it swung the other way because now Arsenal are the team that's going to have to go to City and win the game. And the game plan is completely changed from trying to get a point and not losing the game. Arsenal have to open up and go and try and outplay City in Manchester. I just don't see that happening. So this result, in my opinion, has made it Manchester City's advantage.
How are you feeling after it, Dalen? What's your thoughts on it all?
We're in two different places. I feel like Stevie skipped onto the set here. Very, very, very happy. And let's just say I'm not doing well. Obviously, before last weekend at Liverpool, I think before the match, you'd have taken a point. Given how that game played out, that felt like a loss. And then what happens here today, it's the same thing. You know, it essentially is a loss. And when you're up 2-0, it's the little moments in the game. Obviously, like they're in cruise control and Partey turning it over. There may have been it looked like I thought it was a handball. Clearly, I'm biased with Declan Rice in the middle of the park there, stealing the ball there, which led to the first penalty in their first goal and changed the whole game. I mean, London Stadium was dead, and that's where this game feels like a loss, because the last 2 weekends it's been a little bit of the same thing. We've talked about experience all year, how this team that doesn't have a lot of experience winning these games. Obviously, Zinchenko's played in some big games in the past. He's not available today. Jesus has played in a different role on a different team that had won a title, but there's just a lot of inexperience, and it showed in the last 2 games here, and that they had to have, and especially on the road up 2-0 against West Ham. It's a different challenge of being on the road against Anfield, but it feels against Liverpool, but it feels the same way. It feels like a loss, and I think Stevie's right now. It's City's title to lose. The bookmakers thought that before this weekend started. I liked where Arsenal's position was still in terms of the value with the points, in terms of with the points and not having a game in hand, but overall they were still at plus money. So I thought it was a good bet. And now it's a very different situation. The bookmakers, like always, the big buildings in Vegas for a reason. Those dudes look pretty right now.
Well, yeah, it's always great to get that angle from you as well, Dalen. But just talking about that penalty there, Stevie, the penalty in the first half, was that the moment like at Anfield where we saw the moment where Granit Xhaka and Trent Alexander-Arnold clashed and it felt as though that galvanised the stadium around them? Was this the turning point in this game, West Ham's penalty?
Well, I mean, obviously it was a turning point for West Ham because they weren't in the game up until then. And Gabriel, had he just stayed on his feet, then nothing would have come of it and it would have been 2-0. Personally, this is all about the penalty kick for Arsenal, if you're asking me, because this game's over. If Bukayo Saka scores this penalty kick, this game is done and dusted. The points are in the bag. So yes, the penalty kick that they lose, they're still 2-1 up. It's an incredible goal from Jared Bowen for the equaliser. Arsenal haven't been cut open in this game at all. Nobody sliced them open. They've had an unfortunate penalty and they've had a piece of magic from Jared Bowen. But the game was still in their hands and it was in Saka's hands. And if he scores the penalty, this game is done and dusted. This West Ham side is toast. So, this is all about a missed penalty for me. I'm not kind of convinced that Arsenal's inexperience is what's happened over the last 2 games. Things happen in football, and if somebody said to you, you've got a penalty kick, the ball's at Saka's feet to take the 3 points in this game, you would have taken it all day long, and you would have put it down to nothing other than the fact that one man has missed a penalty. So, in my opinion, the penalty kick that Saka misses, no question, is the reason that they don't get the points. Because, as I said, he puts that in the back of the net. The game is done and dusted.
All right, Stevie. So let me follow up then. If it's not so much an experience, is it pressure? The fact that the penalty was taken the way it was, and what we've seen from the side, that once that goal had gone in from West Ham, we had to see what response we were going to get from Arsenal. Is this that the pressure's getting to them? Is that what we're seeing?
You know, I can't turn around and say that the pressure was too much on Saka. He just took it was a bad penalty. He's just taken a bad penalty. I mean, Mo Salah for Liverpool's missed two penalties in 2 weeks with two terrible penalties. I mean, is it really down to pressure? I'm not so sure. Just a bad strike, not giving yourself enough leeway. Pressure. I'm not so sure Saka missed that because of pressure. It was a poor penalty. He hasn't been at his best over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I don't believe. I don't think he was particularly good at Liverpool, and I don't think he was particularly good today. Was it the wrong man taking the penalty? Maybe that because of the form he was in or lack of. So yeah, in the end they made the decision to let him take it, and he's missed it.
That's what surprised me a little bit there, Kate. Sorry to jump in. What was the fact that he took it? I mean, Jesus was holding the ball. Obviously, he's been in form since coming back healthy. I agree with Stevie. Saka's not been himself. He's been electric all year. He hasn't been as good the last couple matches. And when he was kind of milling around at the box, and then all of a sudden he walked over and handed the ball, I was a little surprised and a little concerned, just because I thought Jesus was going to be the guy that took it. I think he was holding on to the rock. He's been playing well, and it was a huge moment in their season. And that's, I guess, what's frustrating to watch. It is some self-inflicted wounds. It was the penalty, it was the turnover at different times, it was the missed penalty. There's certain moments in this game that shift this thing drastically, and maybe just shifted the entire title race, which is a hard pill to swallow. But I was surprised that Saka took it, and yeah, he didn't take it well.
Yeah, and when I talk about pressure as well, Dalen, I don't even mean just on Saka. I just mean as a whole with what we're seeing here, that it's a similar story to last week in different ways, obviously, but similar scoreline, 2-1 at the first half after they'd had a 2-0 lead as well. How do you think they're dealing with the pressure at this stage?
Well, I thought they'd risen to the challenge a bunch of different times, whether it was Bournemouth earlier in the last month, and then before that, United was the first game. Then in January, I felt like, all right, this team really believes they'll find a way to, like, getting that goal late, winning that game, and winning the game against Bournemouth. You think, okay, this team could be different, but you knew this was going to be a long process and it was going to get tight, and it's gotten tight. And I feel like when they've had the game in their hand in both these games, the last two games, when you're up 2-0, it did seem like they switched off a little bit. In this game, maybe more egregiously, I do think at Anfield, it was Xhaka just kind of firing up their team and their crowd. That was a stupid mistake, and you really can't have that made, but he did, and they didn't respond very well. In this game, they make a mistake. They don't respond very well. I mean, West Ham, most of the second half had created more chances, had put Arsenal under pressure, had a number more corners. It was not as the first 30 minutes were very lopsided, just like at Anfield, and West Ham played them pretty much dead even, if not a little bit better, the final 50 minutes, which is a bit of a concern. And Stevie, there was I think an FC show earlier this week. You were talking about your runs with Liverpool and switching off in game, but having the experience to switch back on and knowing, kind of catching yourself in the moment. I don't know if these guys have that and that ability to turn it back on, because it seems like once they've switched off, they've not been able to get back in the right gear to be able to win games that they have to win.
I kind of see it. I'm thinking of the first. I think there's no question the loss of Saliba, because, in my opinion, the penalty kick is a mistake from Gabriel, and Gabriel since Saliba's been out injured, has had to take over the mantle of the leader at the back. And so I'm not so sure Gabriel is the man that can do that. He's a good centre-back in the Premier League, but he's not your leader, I don't believe, and he's not the guy that's going to galvanise everybody around him. And the fact that he's playing with Holden, who's a stopgap, these are the kind of reasons why maybe things just go against you at the wrong time, because somebody's not a Virgil van Dijk at his best, or he's not a Saliba, so you're losing goals because of these reasons. And that's kind of why I'm not convinced about this experience line, because I think at the end of the day, there's a flaw now in Arsenal's back line because Saliba's not there, because you're relying on Holding, who's not started in the Premier League, and Gabriel, who's a good centre-back in the Premier League, but who's not a leader. So I think you've got to look at all of these things as well. I just think the experience thing, for me, I didn't see that today, quite frankly. I saw a team that lost 2 goals. One, clearly, the first one was totally avoidable. The second one's just a piece of brilliance. That's an incredible volley from Bowen. The ball's, he's waiting on it. It's coming down from a height. He's got a great connection on it. It's got to be a good strike to beat Ramsdale. And then they missed the penalty. So that's why I'm not so caught up in the experience thing. At the end of the day, it's down to them. They had their opportunities. Gabriel didn't have to make that challenge, and he did. And Saka has to score with a penalty.
It's interesting though that Stevie that Dalen brought that up, because I'd actually made a note of it myself to just in case you didn't see the FC show. We asked Stevie about how to stay focused, and we were asking on the other side of things, in that sometimes you think, oh, the title's already ours, and you have to catch yourself. Stevie said he's had to do that when he was a player, catch yourself and focus on exactly what's in front of you. But I thought of it too, Stevie. So it's interesting that Dalen brought it up after it was 2-2, in that the reverse side of that, not letting it get into your head like, oh my goodness, is this getting away from us now? Like, how do you switch your head off and do that?
Well, maybe the one thing I didn't mention that I should have done on the show when I said that was the times it happened was late in games. It was more because in the meat of the game, in the middle of the game, you are concentrated. It's not till towards the end of games where you're maybe leading and something happens, as I said. You know, the crowd all of a sudden come to life because you know something's happened elsewhere. That was probably more of that. I didn't see anybody in an Arsenal jersey today losing concentration. I just saw 2 mistakes, you know, which end up costing them big time, cost them 2 points. The mistake from Gabriel and the mistake from Saka. You know, I mean, West Ham, this is a London derby again. We shouldn't forget that. It's a London derby against a West Ham team. The only way they're going to give you problems is physically. And that's all it was. Jared Bowen had a couple of breaks, but generally it was, you know, stay on your feet with Antonio because he's a battering ram. So, again, that's kind of why I'm not on the experience route. They've made a couple of mistakes, and unfortunately, they've got punished for them.
All right, James Olley was at the London Stadium today, a senior football writer at ESPN. Hey, James, welcome in. Tell us your observations of what you saw today there.
I think Stevie's being quite kind on them, really. I have to say, at 2-0 in this stadium, the game was over. The game was there for the taking. This isn't Anfield. This isn't a place where, you know, these home games are kind of a referendum on whether David Moyes should be manager. You can hear it in the conversations going on when they're 2-0 down. And then, remember, they got beaten 5-1 here by Newcastle not that long ago, and earlier this month, in fact. And there was a palpable sense in the stadium that, oh, here we go again, you know. And Arsenal didn't kill the game off. And these are the moments. And look, it's difficult to be too harsh on them because they've had such a great season. But you are up against an absolute machine in Manchester City. And what happened here, you know, they've let them back into the title race with 2 games on successive Sundays where they've not killed it off when they've been in the ascendancy. And you can write it off once as being the vagaries, the idiosyncrasies of Anfield, the fact that Liverpool put on a good second half display. But it reminded me at 2-0 when Xhaka made that needless tackle on Trent Alexander-Arnold and just got everybody riled up inside the stadium at Anfield. Liverpool then went and scored. And I just thought here, Thomas Partey just switched off. I know Stevie's talking about the penalty with Gabriel, but just before that, Partey loses the ball completely needlessly. Had total control of the game, total control of the ball. Thomas Partey loses the ball in midfield. Declan Rice is suddenly on the back foot. Rice plays to Paqueta. Gabriel makes the challenge, and they're back in the game. And it just strikes me as I don't think it's complacency. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's naivety. Maybe they thought they'd got the job done. It was so quiet at the London Stadium at 2-0. Absolutely dead. The game was, it wasn't over because it was half an hour in, but it felt as though it was the final 10 minutes of the game, not the first half an hour. And Arsenal have just allowed their minds to wander in both of those matches, and they've been punished in the most brutal way possible. And unfortunately, these are the margins when you're dealing against, you're playing against the Manchester City side that gets 90 plus points every single season. A point at Liverpool and a point at West Ham normally would be all right in the context of the season. But City make you have to go the extra mile in these matches. And unfortunately, they've come up short. And now they've lost control of the title race.
Go on, Stevie.
Well, unfortunately, what is the Thomas Partey incident, where it all starts with Declan Rice, is one of those things that, unfortunately, what has made Arsenal so good can sometimes bite you on the backside, because it's all about playing out from the back. It's this: we will continue to do it, and this manager phrase of "I will take responsibility if we lose a goal because of it." That's why they lost that's where the penalty kick started. The Gabriel gave away. They are on a football field. The last place you want the ball is 30 yards from your goal, facing the goal. Somebody rolls it to you, and you've got somebody like Declan Rice up your backside. It's the last place you want the ball. And yes, in today's game, Partey gets the blame, but it's just the last place you want the ball, because there's no room for it. You cannot make an error. If you do not have a good touch, if you lose the ball, the other team's on top of you, as Declan Rice was. So it's one of those situations where it has to be perfect. There's no parachute. There's no get-out clause. If you get it wrong in any sort of manner, then you're in trouble. So again, what has made them so good is kind of bitting them in the backside with a penalty kick.
Just on that note, though, too, I think there's an element of, to win this thing, your best players have to play at a really elite level, and you can't make mistakes. And Partey today was probably one of the, that was a mistake. And he overall, at times you could hear Arteta earlier in the game tell him to try to move the ball quicker and play it faster. But you need to have all your guys play at the highest level, and that's the hard part. To what James just said, with City applying that pressure, is that puts that pressure on you. That's why when they scored 2-0, it felt like a pressure release, but they couldn't really act like that, and they didn't. They kept pushing forward the next 20 minutes, but overall, as good as Partey's season has been, this was not one of his best performances. And in these moments, like, he's got to be great, as well as some number of other guys, because it's not like a ton of squad depth. It's those first dudes have to be really good.
We've got some viewer questions coming in, James. Let me start with you. It says a lot of the big six matchups are rather dull in recent seasons. Do you expect City against Arsenal to be a barn burner or more of a game of chess?
No, I think they'll go for it. I think it will be a sort of a replication of the Liverpool-Arsenal game, although with a little less chaos, perhaps, because of how bad Liverpool are defensively, and City obviously, I think it will be ferocious in the middle of the pitch, because I think the big question about Arsenal before they went to Anfield was, are they prepared to play the way they do home and away pretty much everywhere else? Are they prepared to go and try and dictate and really impose themselves on opponents in Anfield, one of the toughest places you can go? The answer to that emphatically was yes. They were magnificent in that first half against Liverpool. The task of trying to control the game against Manchester City in their own stadium is as hard as it gets. You think about the Barcelona team under Pep Guardiola. It doesn't matter who you were, Real Madrid, anybody. Real Madrid became a counter-attacking side even there, because they knew they couldn't control the ball. I think Arsenal all season, Arteta's been very consistent with this message of it. This is who we are. This is our identity. This is how we play. And I think their approach will make it an absolute cracker. If they can control the ball, and this is why I come back to the midfield issue. Again, I agree with everything Stevie said there in response to about Thomas Partey, but that midfield is going to be where the game is won and lost against Manchester City, quite conceivably where the title is won and lost. And Partey, Xhaka and Odegaard have been magnificent this season, really, really good all season long, controlled games, home and away. But in the last couple of matches, those mistakes have started to creep in. And look, if they do that against City, they'll lose the game. And one other thing I'd like to say about this West Ham game in relation to City is that when it went 2-2, they didn't really look like scoring again, Arsenal. And it was end-to-end. It was basketball at Liverpool. And that, I think, said a lot about Liverpool's defending. West Ham are not a great side defensively. Yeah, Arsenal really created very little when it went 2-2. And again, if they lose control of the game against City, City are the best around at keeping the ball. They cannot afford to do that again. If they do that at the Etihad, they will lose. And if they lose at the Etihad, then I'm not saying it's gone, but then the title looks a remote possibility for them, doesn't it?
Can they beat City, Stevie, in this game? And if so, how are they going to do it?
Yes, they can. Listen, there's no question that if they're at their best and they're passing the ball well, moving around well, and they take the chances, then they can beat anybody at the best. Problem is, you're going into this game not at your best. Having spent most of the season being really consistent and putting 90 minutes together most weekends, they're starting to put periods of time together, which, when it comes to the business end, is looking like it's not enough. For 30 minutes today, the game looked over, but then there's another hour, and then we know what's happened. Same thing against Liverpool for 45 minutes, absolute different class, and then the next 45's disappeared. It's not something Arsenal have done for the majority of the season. They've basically started the game and finished the game on top, and had control of pretty much all the games. This is the wrong time of the season to start just dominating periods of games, because, again, as Ollie said, if you're just dominating for a little period against Man City, unfortunately, when they're dominating, they've got a guy called Haaland who's going to be sticking the ball in the net to take advantage of that dominance. So, yeah, I mean, yes, they can win the game, but I don't think there's anybody outside of Arsenal Stadium that's going to think and believe that Arsenal's going to beat Manchester City in Manchester.
Well, let me put this question to you from one of our viewers then, Dalen. Does City winning big, 27 goals in the last 6 games in all competitions, subconsciously add more pressure on Arsenal?
I don't see how it can't, because you do see the form they're in. So it puts you think that, okay, you have to win. You have to match what they're doing, and not necessarily the output of goals, but definitely the points. And that hasn't happened that way on either front. And I think there's an element of we've got to elevate our game, because you're seeing where they're at. And obviously Arsenal plays Southampton, play another league game before these teams meet on the 26th. And the FA Cup is next week, and obviously the Champions League in between for City. So they've done their job as it relates to the league. They have other work they're going to do in other competitions. And the next time they play is going to be Arsenal. And Arsenal has to be, like, that Southampton game on Friday becomes just absolutely massive. It's another must-win game. And you have the pressure that you have to do it, because City's just going to be waiting in the wings to play you. Now, they've got other things going on, as I mentioned, but it's a different animal. And obviously that pressure mounts. And with the way that they've gone up in these games and drawn these games that feel like losses do not help the mentality going into that game. So they have to not just win, but perform well, I feel like, to feel good about going on the road to Manchester, as Stevie said. Outside of them, and I'm not even sure we'll think they're going to win. The odds makers, I wonder what the number is going to be on that game, because everybody is going to think City's going to win that game, which sometimes does end up being an interesting twist in the title chase or just sports in general. When everybody thinks one thing's going to happen, the opposite can happen. But it's you're seeing the deck pretty hardly stacked against the Gunners right now.
So maybe worth a cheeky bet. We can ask you a bit more about that in a minute, Dalen. James, we know you're going to have a lot of work, but seeing as though Dalen has talked about that game that's next for Arsenal coming up on Friday against Southampton, obviously it goes without saying they absolutely have to win it. But does it need to be an emphatic win as well, just to kind of put things back on the steady even for them?
No, I think they just need to get over the line. The fact that City don't play that weekend, obviously, well, I mean, they're not in the league, they're playing the FA Cup. It will give them psychologically, most importantly, an advantage. What would they be? 7 points clear. I know they'll have played 2 games more, but I think they just need to find a way to win after 2 draws. And those questions will be asked about the mentality, about maybe even the fatigue. I mean, not necessarily saying that Bukayo Saka missed the penalty today because he was tired, but I did interview him about a month ago and just asked him a fairly sort of generic question about how he was feeling ahead of the end of this, the run-in, having played a mid-season World Cup, the condensed schedule, all that sort of thing. And he gave me this really sort of nice answer about how, I'm just going to push down, knuckle down, push through to the end of the season, and then I'm going to go to my room and sleep for the summer. And it was a really nice little line, but it just hinted at he's been asked to do so much game after game after game. And maybe that's the only danger against Southampton on Friday, that, again, it's going to be those creative players. The game is going to be played in in Southampton's half. They're going to, presume, pack the defence, stick many men behind the ball. It's going to be, the onus is going to be on the Sakas, the Martinellis, the Odegaards to get them going again, as it has been time and time again this season. And perhaps that's the only thing, that you're going to those same guys. Maybe you might look to freshen it up. Maybe Trossard comes in. Great signing in January, gives them another option. And Nketiah's back fit now as well, although I think Jesus will probably continue to lead the line. So they do have one or two options if they want to change it up. But no, I think they just have to get the result by hook or by crook and make sure they've got that big lead on the board, because that'll be the big thing. They can point to the scoreboard pressure, if you like, to Manchester City and say, look, we have the points, you have the games. That's the most pressure they can apply at this point.
Well,
James, great to have you with us.
Can I ask the boy, just off the back of what Ollie was saying there, is it just me, but I get the impression that Man City look as though they've just started the season, and Arsenal, as Ollie was saying, with Saka talking about tiredness a little bit. When I think of both sides, I think of a fresh Man City, almost kind of they're starting the season. Does that make any sense? And kind of Arsenal are looking a little fatigued. Does anybody else get that impression that City just look completely fresh?
No, I thought when City beat Liverpool and just rolled them over really in that second half, I think that almost fired the starting pistol on their season really. And you look at some of the players that are coming to the fore. Now, De Bruyne had probably not been on his A game. I mean, even Haaland had a little bit of a mid-season, I wouldn't say it's a dip when he scored 500 goals or whatever he has this season, but he did have a little run of games where he wasn't quite as prolific as he has been for the rest of the campaign. Grealish is starting to come to the fore. Mahrez is consistent again. You do get the sense about peaking at the right time. They've been there, they've done it, they've won 4 titles. They know what they're doing. Whereas Arsenal have been, as I say, going to those same players. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that there were 7 players that started every single game, every single Premier League game for Arsenal, up to about 20, 22, 24 matches, something like that. So in that area, it's a huge ask of those players to go and go and go again. And they don't obviously have the expertise, the know-how to necessarily tailor their season to peak at the right time. I remember Harry Kane talking about this at the World Cup, that when he won the Golden Boot in 2018, even though he scored more goals than anyone else, he felt tired by the time he got to the semi-finals. Yet he learned to taper his performance through tournaments, and City have done that. It's Stevie will know better than me. It's a skill you acquire over time, and Arsenal don't have it yet, whereas City do.
I think the depth of the squad is just different though too. I mean, when you look even this past week with the lineup they had against Bayern versus Leicester, like they can just swap guys out, then the level doesn't drop as much as it does for some of the guys in Arsenal when you have to sub in. I mean, Nketiah's had decent moments, but that's a big change from him to Jesus. Whereas you don't have the same thing across all the attacking positions at City, where they just have that squad depth it's better, and that's where you see this freshness. And also, I think Haaland not playing the World Cup helps, and some other things. Their team overall and their institutional knowledge of doing this many times helps.
James, we are going to let you escape now before they kick you out of the stadium there. But it's been great to have you with us as always. We'll speak to you again soon. Let me continue that chat though with you two guys just before we do close up. What are you expecting from this game against Southampton, Stevie?
I expect Arsenal to win it. And if they start the way they did against Liverpool and West Ham, then the game will be over. Southampton's a team that they started well in a lot of games, but then once something happens to them, they seem to just, somebody pulls the plug and they just go flat, and then it's just the game's done. So I don't expect Arsenal to slip up at all in this game. I expect them to win. Yes, they'll probably be a little jittery going into it because they know they can't afford to slip up, but ultimately, with the ability they have and the way they play, it will be too much for Southampton.
What does an Arsenal fan want then, just to end at this point, Dalen? Do they want, as James said, for them to just get over the line and still win this game, or do they want a big fat result that makes them go whoosh?
Okay, for the love of God, we need 3 points. Let's just start there. That's everything else is gravy. But yes, I would like to see them play better because City is the next challenger for them. So I think you want to go in with confidence go into that game. You can't go in just scuttling into the game and finding the 3 points. That, as much as it is, that's all you really need. But I do think to beat City, you got to be at your absolute best, mentally, physically, all of it. So I think it's important that they put in a heck of a performance and play well in the game and play well for more sustained period of time. The last 2 weeks really was 40 minutes at Liverpool, about 30 minutes today, where they bossed the game and played really well. And in the second half of both those matches, they struggled. And it's one thing being on the road at Anfield, like I said earlier, it's totally different at West Ham. And if they make that penalty, it's different. But this is a game where I think they need to play well, play more consistently, win the game, and go into that City clash with some confidence, because obviously the season's going to come kind of boiling out of that.
You know, Stevie's half answered this. So I'll start with you, Dalen, and I will just make sure I get confirmation from Stevie. I'll ask you a question. What does your gut say? Who's winning the title? Dalen?
Well, if you couldn't tell, my general vibe is much lower than it was last time I was on with you guys. So I think we're looking at not just for my bank account that's going to take a huge L, because we invested heavily in Arsenal around Christmas. I started to fully believe, and I said I couldn't handle that type of that faltering down the stretch again. This is less about them faltering as much as City's been outstanding. If City wins it, obviously they'll be deserving, but they are in flat out in a better position for all the kind of reasons we talked about today, whether it was the fixture list coming up, how many playing at home against Arsenal, the squad depth, the form, kind of all of it. So right now, and I do think the experience. So I think all of those things factor for City. That's why they were favorites as of last week. The thing switched and they went to a pretty big favorite. Now they're minus 200 to win it. So you got to bet $200 just to win 100. You did that 2 weeks ago. You could bet $100 to win 130 on City. So it's a massive change in a couple weeks, but I think a rightful one.
A massive change in 1 week for you, Stevie. You've got City winning it now, have you?
Yeah. Kind of talking through today's actually convinced me even more now that I think just from a physical standpoint, I get the impression that City are building up a head of steam where Arsenal are kind of losing steam. So yeah, I think this result today and kind of the way it panned out doesn't look good for Arsenal.
It's like, to use a horse racing analogy, really just we're coming down the back stretch and you see the City's on the turn and they are just barreling down, and you got Arsenal, they're trying to hold on, and you just know that it's like, it doesn't look good. That's where it does not look good right now.
Change of gear.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. There's still more time and there's still more show for you to come today, guys. Make sure to join the team after the Forest Manchester United game, right after it, for a reaction straight away right here on our ESPN FC YouTube page. See you then.